Dr. Gowda, and respected audience. I warmly welcome you to this seminar by Dr. Said Selim, our Director for Eastern and Southern Africa. Said needs no introduction, however, I will give a brief about him. Said has his PhD in crop physiology from the University of Nottingham in 1982. He joined ICRISAT at Patancheru in January 1990 as International Associate Scientist in Agronomy. And later he was transferred to Nairobi in October 1991 to work exclusively on PGNP. He was appointed as Principal Scientist Agronomy in January 96 and as Site Leader for Kenya in January 97. He worked as Principal Scientist and Regional Representative from January 2002 and as Director ESA from January 2004. Said retires from the Institute on 31st August. Although he worked on chickpea and groundnut, he has a special interest for the PGNP and proud to inform that he helped to increase the PGNP cultivation from 400 hectares to 1 million hectares in ESA. I welcome Said to deliver this seminar. Said, please.
Willie, thank you for inviting us. I mean, my son, my wife, and I here to say bye-bye, because I could have walked, or he could have walked there and decided to say bye-bye from there. But this is where I started my life, in ICRISAT. So thank you for that. As you see the title, if you expect science, it is going on its own. If you expect science, you are going to get very little. I moved to East Africa in Nairobi. The work in PGNP was very rudimentary. And basically what was happening is that I grew up in an area where PGNP is, in northern Uganda, where PGNP is an important crop. People eat it every day, but there was no research done there. When I went there, I looked around and so on, and I realized that no government officials were working on it. The only place where there was a bit of research was in Kenya at Katumani. And I looked also around when I was moved there that farmers there were growing only medium and long duration, mostly long duration, except for Uganda, which was a medium duration. And they didn't grow it as a monocrop. They considered it as a bonus crop, and therefore they are not going to leave their land to grow anything other than their main crop, which is usually cereal. In northern Uganda it was finger millet. The rest of the eastern and southern Africa was intercrop with maize. So the question of putting a monocrop at that time was not there. I did a lot of discussions and so on. This guy said that, look here, we want ball-seeded. Even Uganda, that was growing the small-seeded type. The Indian type was talking about small-seeded. I mean, they preferred ball-seeded. They want something that cooks fast. They want something that swells, because if you put a handful, then with us where we have, my father had 17 children, so you know, you cannot have a ton. So you need something that swells, okay? And the research systems never talked about it. When I talked, somehow I started talking to the private sector and so on, and there was a Shah in Nairobi where, is Trusha here? I think they're neighbors. Yeah? Where is he, Trusha? Not yet in, yeah. They're a neighbor now. I started talking to them and so on. They said, look here, we want large quantities, but they're not there. Started talking to farmers. Farmers say, look here, we get so low price that we have no interest. So there was a disconnect you could see there. So that's where we started. You know, initially in ICRISAT, you had to do everything from here and send it for adaptive testing and so on. So the approach was the same for PGNP. We took some varieties from here, and when we tested them, whatever they call long duration behaved like medium duration. And Later on, CLL, you remember, in the early mid-90s, they said that Pigeon Pea lacked internationality, and therefore our effort would be on short duration. But I had a project which I went with from here, from African Development Bank. And in that project, they say Pigeon Pea should be part of the cropping systems, including the word intercropping. Because if you do cropping systems, it means that you could rotate 1 year after the other. So that was one of the challenges. The second thing is that the short duration we had here was small seeded, brown seeded. They had already told me that they wanted a different type of material. The third thing was that it took long to cook. In India, color does not matter because you dehull. But also traders in the region said, look here, we export, but we like large seeded because recovery is higher. If you put small seeded, recovery is smaller. So really, this IMOD, we were doing it in an ad hoc way because we were already talking to people at that time, but we wanted to develop a breeding program. So that's that. Earlier research and survey by Kanayan, is it? Kanayan had indicated that in each of the Pigeon Pea growing countries in the region, we are having a loss of $5 million per annum per country. So fusarium wilt was also a major problem. So we had to revise our strategy. As I said, material we brought from here, which is supposed to be medium or long duration, behaved differently. And a lot of breeders always thought that photoperiod was the major thing. By the way, my master's degree was in vegetable breeding, but I did a PhD in physiology. So those two balances made me look at a different strategy. And I just thought, okay, how can I do it? Peter Crawford and the group and the Summerfields were doing things in the greenhouse, in the control chambers, and I didn't have a control chamber to understand the effect of temperature and photoperiod. So I scratched my head and thought, okay. So what I did was to start using Kenya. Kenya is beautiful. That is near the equator. Therefore, the effect of photoperiod is not important. So it is only day length. You start from the sea, which is over 30 degrees centigrade, and you go up to Muguga, which you have average temperatures of about 15 degrees along the equator. So you can separate the effect of temperature from the effect of photoperiod. And if you saw my first picture there, we had to now create artificial lighting and so on to make sure that we understand what it is. So we separated the effect of photoperiod and temperature. We developed wilt-seek plot because some of the material like ICP 9145 and other material, which were resistant here, when we took them to Malawi, they were resistant. But in Kenya, they were susceptible. So the question was that, was there race variability and so on? So we created wilt-seek plot to make sure that we understand if there are variability and resistance. And actually the material you breed, not breed, but screen in Kenya, in Kiboko, were found to be resistant in the region. We know, and a lot of times we used to fight with Dave Roebuck about sorghum. And one of the things he told me is that, Said, we have worked on farmers' field and on station. Sometimes varieties are not important. It's management that becomes important. So we had to include that. Market needs I talked about. And the study again afterwards was to try to look at market opportunities. When is the market available? Because a market is a pool. You can do everything, have yield of 5 tons, so long as there's no pool, your IMOD, no farmer will get it. You put in the market issues and so on. They'll invest not only in varieties, they'll invest in other inputs, weeding, fertilizer, and so on. So issues of understanding the market was very important. And our market at that time, the major area where we looked at, because we had the information, was that between May and November, there's a shortage of pulses in India. So we had to target varieties to make sure that they mature reach the Indian market before glut, so that one, you can sell, two, you get a premium. So, as I told you, I'm not going to go into details of this. What came out is that, and this also happens here, is that if you have short duration under high temperature, just imagine that, short duration under high temperature, it gets delayed. You put it at Kiboko, which is about 24 degrees centigrade. You get it at about 120, 90 days maturity. You take it to Nairobi, it takes about 140 days. So at high temperature is about 110, 120. At Kiboko, which is about 24 degrees, you get it at 90 days. And at about 18 degrees, you get it 150. Therefore, short duration, other than getting a lot shorter, at lowest temperature, you have the highest delay. You go to medium duration, you put it at high temperature, that's near the equator. Then you find out that it behaves like long duration. You put it at Kiboko, it takes about 130 days to reach maturity. You take it at higher elevation, it gets delayed. So its delay is also slightly at a higher temperature. You take long duration, you put it at near the sea, which is above 26 degrees, it doesn't flower. So it keeps on growing up to 4 meters. You put it near, at Kiboko, it takes about 280 days to reach maturity. You put it in Kabete, it takes 150 days. That's the same crop behaving differently. When you look at it, at the medium duration and long duration, which are local land races, not the one we have tinkered with in ICRISAT here, you find that they have special area of adaptation. So that knowledge and the fact that the medium and long duration are sensitive to photoperiod, whereas short duration is not, we use them as a building block for the breeding effort in Eastern and Southern Africa. And therefore, we knew which variety to take. You have taken into it that you wanted large seeds that cook fast, seeds that swell. You knew that you wanted it for a certain cropping system. So breeding became a routine. Now, I came back here in the germplasm to look at what we have and so on. And then I realized that there was a gap. In Mozambique, we had not done any collections. In Uganda, somehow there wasn't enough collections. In Tanzania, we just collected it where we could reach. So we did germ collection, and 2 students, they're masters, and just fell into what I've just told you about special area of adaptation and so on. So we used that. We looked at, can we use it for other things? And that's that. I've told you about grain characteristics and so on. I'm not going to go into that. Resistance to Fusarium wilt, I've told you about. And I told you where we have put our seed plot and so on. Pest was another problem. I remember when I was here in 1990, we had Latif, and he took me to the field. First in 1990, showed me his material, which was supposed to be tolerant, and I was very happy. Second year, I went with him again. That was about October, whatever it is. There was nothing in the field. I said, Latif, what happened? So we have had huge pest population. And he started telling me one of the things that is with pod borer, if you have high population, it'll start eating even flowers. If the flowers finish, they'll eat the birds, BUDS. And if that fails, then they'll start eating each other. So that's how they have started now behaving. So pest is a major problem for pigeon pea. Unlike here, where you have got pod borers, in Eastern and Southern Africa, you had pod flies and pod suckers. So you have a combination of 3 pests. Pod borer is basically Helicoverpa and Maruca. And then storage pest was bruchids. So we initiated an understanding also of the pest problem. And one thing that came out, or a few things that came out, is that, and this I've learned even recently, is that if flower pods are in different, I don't know if you can see it here. How do I do this? If you see them separately and so on, then pod borers will have a lot of problems walking from one pod to another. The other thing which I found out, and that's what I was doing, is that this is the material that came from us and is now in southern Malawi. That very dark, hard pods tend to be tolerant and so on. So we had our green podded types all over the place being eaten, but these ones were pretty clean. The other thing was the deep loculation from seed to seed on the pod. It looks as if the Helicobacter has a problem of moving from one seed to another. He has got to come out. So damage tend to be less. So we looked at this. We haven't come to anything yet. It's continuing. I don't know when we're going to abandon it or continue with it. So that's the other thing we looked at. Now, my thinking as I go along is that probably we need to look at issues of molecular, biotech sort of things. And one of the things which I realize is the issue of biosafety. But we need to find out how we can work with resistance. Still, this one is off. It is off. The possibility of using transformation for issues of putting a bit of tolerance. And one of the things that keeps on coming to my mind, I don't know if Keke is here or is in trouble, and is probably transferring, instead of BT genes per se, and Dave, I don't know, you can correct me in that, how about using soybean, which is not very much attacked? Is it possible? So I've discussed that, and that's that. Yeah, I've told you earlier on that crop management is very important. This is the work we did in 1995, actually, and that's on Farmers Field. In Farmers Field, we are looking at improved and farmer management. And if you look at it, whether you're using improved varieties or farmer variety, there is an increase in yield if you use improved agronomy. So we did work on that and came out that if you put two rows closely together, where you had one row of maize, put two rows 50 centimeters apart, closely together, and you end up with 3 rows of maize and so on. You do not lose much production of your maize, and you gain production. That's your maize yield as compared to the farmer practice. So you don't gain, actually, it does a lot better. So that's one we are now trying to use, which farmers are taking in Eastern Kenya. And the other thing which we looked at is that we need to look at, if you look at groundnuts, beans, these are monocropped, and they are normally harvested early. The whole idea of intensification is that you should have 2 crops per year as opposed to 1. And therefore, we have done that, and we have put groundnuts, intercrop with pigeon pea. You harvest your groundnuts early, leave the pigeon pea to take over. So that has also worked. And for the first time, when I had talked to Danida Group and the KVL University, for them to provide funding to partners and so on, and I got involved in designing and so on. We didn't get any money, but it was very important for me to get out. Everybody talks about nitrogen fixation and so on. In Africa, we do not have real data. So the work through them indicated that after you have grown your pigeon pea with maize in Babati and in Malawi, in southern Malawi, you harvest your maize and harvest your pigeon pea, residual effect of pigeon pea on the succeeding crop or what is left in the ground is 40 kilos of N. that is not including leaves and so on and so on, because leaves tend to be eaten. We wanted to be realistic. So that also came out. Now, I told you earlier on, farmers felt the market was not there. They got low price. And the traders were saying, look here, one is that we don't have enough quantities, but two is that the quantity we have is of poor grades. And that's why we give farmers we give them less money. The teamwork in the region, the task-based approach of scientists in Eastern and Southern Africa, that is, you don't go there, you're a breeder, you work alone. After you've done, give it to economists. After you're done, you give it to agronomists and so on. We worked as a team across programs because that's the task we are in. We are not working as a team. After finish, we can move to the next thing. The task-based approach is that we sat together, started looking at it. George was in Katumani, George Okwachi at the back there. We worked with Paul Omanga and the like to start looking at what are the issues. And as I told you, that's what the traders felt, and that's what the farmers did. So Ade Freeman and later Bekele worked on the value chain, and we realized that each farmer grows less quantities. So the bicycle person goes, gets it from one farmer, goes to the next, and so on. So he's getting his cut and his costs. It takes it to a small area, the person buys, assembles it. Quality are different, size are different, stones and so on, chicken, whatever the droppings are there. Now it goes to the traders who assembles. After assembling, that's when they take it to Nairobi. So after talking and so on, then we had training on how to do business. So we had farmer groups, producer marketing groups, where we trained them on grades and standards. We also we had put in the breeding program that we are going to have only one size, one color. So the differentiation between size and color were no longer there. All varieties were brown, cream seeded, large, brown, because the traders, the buyers wanted something round so that it's easy to dehull. So all these things, we taught them on grades and standards and so on. We talked to the traders. So there was that direct line, and bang, the price started doubling. And that's what we did in Tanzania, and that's what you saw in Tanzania, because they knew what are grades and standards, they worked together, and so on. So the price of pigeon pea now at the farm gate is about 3 times the price of maize. And surprise, surprise, in northern Malawi now, we're talking of intensification. They've gone straight away now into growing pigeon pea as a monocrop. So those are the changes taking place. As I said, one of our major problems was seed. Okay? But seeds, farmers, first of all, private sector in Africa and Eastern and Southern Africa is very weak. Number 2, they are only interested in maize. And 3 is that if they're doing hybrid, they're interested in, it can only be bought in areas where it's high potential. In other words, they are not interested in the dry areas because farmers are not prepared to invest because of the uncertainties and so on. So we had to look at alternative delivery seed systems. And we developed still partnership with the private sector. We worked with farmer groups so that they know the varieties they are going to have is white, ball-seeded, resistant to wilt, fits into their cropping systems. So those are the things we put together, working with them and so on. And on top of that, we talked to the government, but the government rules about seed is so stiff. But in some countries, we started talking, and then we influenced the policy to say, okay, we are not going to sell it everywhere. Let's have it within the district. So they came up with quality declared seed, where it is improved seed, but it's not what they want. But farmers can grow. We talk to agro dealers. These are the people who sell inputs, fertilizer, pesticides, livestock, blah, blah, blah. so that they agreed now to work with the farmer groups that produce quality declared seed so that they start selling. And in northern Tanzania, that's working very well. In Kenya is the problem. In Malawi, we have it in the subsidiary system. So that is going on. When we started, the only breeder who had a degree and who was concentrating in the region on pigeon pea was from Kenya, but he was also doing his PhD, Paulo Manga. The rest are people either who are working on beans and therefore putting a bit of part-time, and only when you have funding to do the things. So we started thinking that we have to build capacity. Degree training, non-degree training where we brought a lot of people here, processing and utilization, and started working with the private sector and all these things to make sure that things are brought together. Farmers, the creation of awareness takes place and so on. We talked with government, we did TV and so on. So we created an environment where people started considering that these crops are important. Now, we talk about partnerships, but they're very difficult to create. And because the crop has started becoming important, we had a lot of people who started wanting it. And Dave, you know that we could stand our ground to CIMMYT, which has got maize as a crop, when they wanted to make sure that it's part of their program in Simlesa. We said, look here, we develop it like you do, but we need to make sure that we are recognized that is an important component. So they had given us about 600,000, and I told Willie, I'm not going to take it. And we say, is your deal? So we ended up getting about 1.2 million to make sure that we contribute to the project in a sensible way. So if you have got something to deliver and you are open about it, then other things are no longer important because you are upfront. You have something under the table and you're not showing it, that will be your problem in future. So in developing partnerships, you need to be open about it. Even if you're going to get 80% of the money, put it on the table. So those are the things how we worked with partners and so on. At that time, the first donor to give us money was African Development Bank. And when the project was about to end, we were struggling. But we were starting to have impacts. The government started supporting. So we had Danida, we had USAID, we had Rockefeller Foundation, we had McKnight and so on. So you produce results, you have things going on, but you need to be ahead of the game. So partners you need to develop, you need to have partners who are going to add value, and that's what we did there. We were prepared to say, no, our hands are full, and so on. So those are some of the things that really go towards those things. We did on-farm demonstrations, but we also realized that we are up there. As things start going down at the national level, at the farm, ease on it as you are, then those people will know that is their responsibility. Don't keep on running from it from Patanchero to Nairobi and then to Tanzania to the farmer's field and you think that you are going to lead everything. It doesn't work. You have got to know when to do it, who does it better, what is the comparative advantage, and this is what we did. We did follow, we worked with all the private sector, everybody and so on. And for the first time, in Malawi, where the government was talking about subsidy program and therefore supporting fertilizer and maize seed, the president realized that legumes are important, and our legumes were the first to go into the subsidy program because of what we had. I'm not going to go into that. What I want to show you here before I conclude is that this is when we started, and that's the area. Okay? I mean area. And where are we now? That's where we are now. That's about 1 million from here. These are real figures. All these figures are from the nation. Originally, we used to get it from FAO, but the governments now are taking a serious look into this. So you see, it started from here in 1990-92, And this is where we are now. Yield per hectare started at that, and that's where we are now. And the tonnage is there. So, as I said, these are real figures. We have done impact assessment studies twice in Tanzania. We have done it in Kenya, and we have done it in Malawi. And our varieties are the ones really going there. Now, the crop has moved, as I said, from being food crop into being both food and cash crops. And we had to start, we did a lot of effort in putting medium duration. And really, it was an accident. I was in Kenya. We are testing varieties. Kenya has a bimodal type of rainfall. The reliable rain starts in October, ends in January. And the long rain starts in February, March, ends about May. And what we realized is that farmers had long duration, but they always fail because of long rains that failed. So I started work on medium duration. But to put a twist on it is that the medium duration should be able to give you a ratoon crop. So in a bad year, you have one crop. In a good year, you have 2 to 3 crops, and therefore you triple your yield actually as a result of that. Okay? So I've talked about that. There is being that and so on, and policies now are in place for the crop to, is very important now. All the governments in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Malawi, and Mozambique are taking the crop, is an important crop. Ethiopia has moved into it. We are testing it because we know how to target what varieties. South Africa is there. Zambia has a crop. Now, I've thought through, and I'm leaving it to you, that what are the key areas? If I were to be given a chance, how would I go again? I don't want a chance, because we have got some people now in place who will take over from us, from me, and so on. The first thing is that make sure that you do what is required. Let it be demand-driven. Make sure you identify the key constraints. Look at the IMOD and make sure that it is IMOD-driven, that is market-led. And for anything, you know, they talk about competitive grants and so on. This is a problem sometimes because even research takes a long time to be achieved. So you need to be on target all the time. So you need management that supports the research. I've been there working on it for 20 years. If they had removed me, who was a champion, and put somebody else, maybe we would have changed the direction. You need support, donor funding continuously. And as research managers, you should be able to identify what is a hype and what is really possible. Because there are people who can be very good at talking, but you need to be able to see what's happening on the ground. And as I said, that's what it is, and therefore the future direction, we hope that will continue intercropping. We need to strengthen seed system. We need to find really what are alternative markets. If India is the biggest importer of pulses, today you have Australia, Burma, and so on going, what is the alternative? We need to look at that. Ensure that value addition takes place in the country, that's dal making and the likes, other than exporting whole grain. And as I said before, let's look at conventional and use of biotechnological tools. I'm a physiologist, and I know also a breeder, that one of the things is that for you to have yield advantage in hybrid is heterosis, hybrid vigor. But where we come from, flowering to maturity is dependent on residual moisture. That's one. 2, you are going to put another crop in between. Now, if pigeon pea becomes very vigorous and you're intercropping with maize, there will be competition between the two. and therefore we could have yield penalty on maize. Is the farmer going to be interested in it? I don't know. Number two is that I've seen in a year where you have good rainfall from the beginning, pigeon pea becomes vigorous. Vegetative growth in Kiboke can be up to 3 meters. Even with irrigation, when you have then rain stopping end of May, early June, then you have these huge photosynthetic apparatus, transpiration apparatus, and therefore leaves start falling at flowering, and podding then starts dropping. And therefore that earlier advantage becomes a disadvantage. So we need to tailor that when we are going for hybrid, knowing where, targeting where we are going to take. Finally, we need to have a seed system in Africa to support that. So while the science is going on, let's try to look at all these things in place before we run into science without knowing what it is. I'm not saying that it's not there, but let's be cautious about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Saeed. And now the floor is open for a discussion and questions.
Dave, and then CLL.
I have to ask you something, Saeed. I mean, you mentioned that pigeon pea, particularly in eastern and southern Africa, is intercropped, the cereals.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what do we know about the interaction with the cereal, other than the nitrogen fixation and leaving nitrogen in the soil? Does it make a difference whether it's maize or sorghum or millets? And if so, does that work to our advantage in promoting the appropriate cereal crop with the pigeon pea, since pigeon pea may be more attractive from various points of view, as opposed to what I think we're doing more of, which is trying to promote the pigeon pea from the cereal perspective?
One of the things that I looked at is that if you look at the land races of sorghum, which in East Africa tends to be late, you need either slightly earlier maturing sorghum and a later pigeon pea, because what really you want for you to achieve this is that you need two crops that are basically in harmony. Basically, it means that pigeon pea has to be slow growing at the beginning, and your cereal has got to be fast growing. And when your cereal component now reaches maturity, should be got rid of, so that now pigeon pea takes over. If they're both flower and mature at the same time, there's always competition, because pigeon pea is like a marathon runner. It starts slowly and ends up fast. So you need to know the balance between those phenology, basically. And then the other thing is that you have to select your cereal which makes sure that it takes moisture from the surface, because pigeon pea will mine the soil, which is, water beyond the roots of cereal crop. So that's that. In Babati, one of our success was to work with the national program in Selian to make sure that they replace their later maturing maize with an earlier maturing maize that also work out. When you intercrop as opposed to monocrop, maize loses about 10%. So you have that. But the gain is on yield of pigeon pea, fertility of pigeon pea, and the markets which they get, because the price of maize, pigeon pea is about 3 times the price of maize. CLL.
When we started this program in 91, you indicated that the market demand was for a particular seed size, seed color for export, and you harnessed that for enhancing area under pigeon pea, which has succeeded. I'm looking at it on the other side in terms of, by expanding this cultivation, how much pigeon pea is being consumed locally, or is it just meant for export? I'm looking at the nutrition angle of the whole story. What is the situation?
I'll give you two things. Is that actually pigeon pea pods and matures at the time when there is no vegetable. It's dry. And therefore, and this is what is not put in the figure, probably they eat green pigeon pea, about 30% of it is eaten as pods, but we have not done the study. And we don't know whether there are losses due to that. Number two is that in our work, for example, in Babati, before Fusarium Well, they were producing pigeon pea, but it's mostly for export. And they told us they didn't like the taste. So the issue of taste and utilization came in. And therefore, we trained farmers. Who was the person dealing with nutrition here? After him? Omaid Singh. And that's where it is. The other thing, instead of looking for people from outside, we made sure that Omaid Singh went from here, did 3 months in total of training farmers at the farm level in use of utilization and so on. And in Babati now, the amount of pigeon pea utilized on farm is about 15% of grain is used as food, whereas it was not being done. In Malawi, I was there last week, and the area where we introduced our pigeon pea in northern Malawi is expanding, but straight away we talked about utilization and so on. So we are going hand in hand. We realize that if it becomes white gold, then probably nutrition could suffer. But at the moment, we have that balance in place. Yes, Otaji.
Said, you alluded to the hybrids research at the end of your talk. If intercultivation with maize reduces yield by 30%, and in case we have the hybrids advantage, heterotic advantage of about 25 to 40%, then in that case, it should really compensate the whole scenario, and the yield advantage of pigeon pea should be, total advantage should be much better. What holds, say, promotion of these hybrids in that area? I have seen recently in last May when I was in Malawi, very good these varieties themselves, medium duration, including germplasm 7035. So is it that the bigger is much more than desired would be there in hybrids, and which may really affect maize to greater extent than this 30% or like that, in your view?
For me, I say, when you are going to a battle, you have got to cover your back, you have got to cover your side, and you have got to look at the front where you are going. So I'm saying, let's be prepared for all these things. I've not said stop hybrid pigeon pea. Let's go make sure that all areas where we are looking at are taken care of. We started work on short duration pigeon pea. We spent a lot of effort in Eastern Africa. It did not work, but we had other alternatives. So let's be cautious as we move on. Let's look at options. We have got younger people who are taking over from us. Let them hear from either a senile man or a man with experience as we move forward.
Sir, you said this is a story of 20 years of pigeon pea. I would like to know from your experience how these 20 years have impacted on individual farmers, you as well, individual farmers and also youth of Africa. Has it created young entrepreneurs who have come into this value chain?
You know, when we had a board meeting in Arusha, while Willie Da was looking at the success, my wife, in a heart, in a light mood, said that I'm coming here actually to see whether Said has left some children here. And we did interpret. Oh, no, yeah. You know what? 15 years ago, when you went to Babati, without exception other than the trading center, everybody had grass thatched house. And they harvested firewood. Okay? You go there, everybody has got either a bicycle, a motorcycle, semi-permanent houses. The government realized, and we talked with the government, that the area is high agricultural potential area, not Pigeon Pea potential area, and therefore they have tarmacked the whole area. Traders come from India now to set things there, buy there, seal, put in container, and pack directly. And therefore, there is that thing that is going on. And it's interesting. I'm not hyping. Really, you are there. CLL, you have gone there. And so anybody who has gone there will know that there's a change in lives of the people there. And we need to emulate that in other areas and look at where there are potential areas. Okay. We are going to have a seminar about it before I leave, and then they'll hand it over. So it will be on the 29th in Nairobi, and we'll look at the impact assessment. Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
What about the seriousness of pests? It has increased over the years, as we have seen in India. Pigeon pea is the most affected crops. What is your situation?
It is, in Africa, it is either a curse or an opportunity, because traditionally they have not been using pesticides. Because of that, we are very cautious about training farmers on judicious use of pesticides. You know, one of the things that we realized is that if you grow long duration, the thing that triggers it to flower is cooler temperatures. So flowering occurs at the time when temperatures are lower. And that's when the pest population is also low. And that's when there is no rain. And therefore, your effect of control and so on is more effective. So up to now, they are doing about 3 times to spray. We have now more knowledge. We need to be cautious about it. Environmentalists are also concerned about it. So I think you intensify, you expect it to increase.
Said you said that about 30% of chickpea is used as green seeds and matures. Yeah, pigeon pea. Sorry, always chickpea. Sorry for that. So, do you think that we should have some specific focus for vegetable type pigeon pea, because we don't have adequate focus in breeding program for that?
We need to think about sweetness, because sweetness is not what they go for. They go for ease to cook and so on. So because they cook beans, they cook it also at that stage and they don't want sweetness and so on. Probably we'll reach a stage when there was a market where they were exporting from Kenya and so on, pigeon pea as green. Probably we need to look at that, but those are some of the things that need to be looked at. What is the comparative advantage? Is there a demand? Because at the moment, the demand is local, and the varieties we have, they don't have a problem with it. I didn't hear the second. Okay, you talk intercropping with pigeon. In the 80s and early 90s, on this campus, Dr. Chinong worked on that. And what came out is that if you leave pigeon pea first year, second year, it grows very fast and starts suppressing other crops. That's one. Two is that the root system is so extensive that your crop which you're going to grow is an annual suffers. And in the region, they don't still believe in conservation agriculture. They want to go there with their oxen in between, so they want to get rid of everything. One of the things they told us is that they don't like big stem, big rooted varieties because ox cultivation becomes a problem. It is the latitude. Now, what we have done, and three varieties have been released in Malawi. I didn't want to go into details. In Malawi, as you move medium duration away from the equator, because it's photoperiod sensitive, it tends to be later, and therefore flower later. Yeah, latitude. Altitude is because it is no longer photoperiod, you are near the equator, so it's only temperature influence. Yeah, short duration becomes very late at cooler temperature, high altitude. And the period between flowering and maturity is the one most delayed. Yeah. Rajiv.
So I think I'm thinking in context of iMood concept, for instance, and as we were discussing, and Dr. Gowda mentioned that you may have the domestic demand, for instance, in the region, and now, in terms of India, it's always ever-growing demand. So I think that we need to have more pigeon pea. You have done wonderful work. Productivity has increased, but it seems that there is still scope. And we were talking, you mentioned that for hybrid, we need to be cautious, of course, but then the question is that what kind of challenges we have, whether we still, of course, and now as science is advancing, we need to tackle those challenges. Even the second thing, when you say that still you need to continue with the varietal development program, and if we are doing this variety development, it takes a lot of time. So now the question is with modern tools, for instance. I think that in the region you have a lot of scope that even those traditional breeding program or whatever we have, we need to start integration of those modern tools in the breeding program so we can tackle this breeding issue. And as well as that, I still believe that we need to tackle the challenges in this harnessing the heterosis. So what would you like to suggest in these two different points, Saeed?
I said two things. One is that we need to use modern science to make sure that we cut short the time from science to varietal development. That's one. Number two is that let's not look at the science only when we are doing hybrid. Let's look at what are the challenges on the ground in the region so that we make sure that as we are going, you look left, right, behind, and forward so that you go on a sure footing. That's all. I didn't say stop hybrid. I didn't say don't use modern science. I'm saying where I came from was just like dark ages. I didn't have knowledge. I didn't have experience. I had to walk, and there was a lot of walk back, walk forward, walk back, and so on. Now that I'm really ready, I'm done. Yeah, David.
Just follow up on that, though. I guess I'm trying to figure out, have you actually narrowed the yield gap in pigeon pea in East and Southern Africa?
Actually,
and if so, how much has it been done? Because I was trying to go back to your figures. You got about 30% increase in yield over 20 years, about 1%. Half of that's probably genetic gains, so it's not great. It's about what we'd expect. The real question is, how close are we to maxing out the yield gap? And if we're close, then we got to bring in new technologies and new tools. But if you haven't changed that at all, then we got to figure out how do we narrow the yield gap.
The yield gap has got two components: management and the yield potential. And what is really making us narrow the yield gap is the importance of the crop, and therefore farmers are taking it very seriously. But before we go to the next level, if you consider that in the region we are talking about really 20 years, 15, 16 years of real work, that we still have other things to look at: fusarium wilt, narrow sources of resistance, pests, and so on. So it is those management and so on, not really narrow the gap per se, but what is bringing it down. As I said, agronomy, we need to narrow it. Two is pests and diseases, issues of climate changing and so on. Just like I showed you that in medium duration, instead, the yield has not increased, but the fact that your ratoon crop is twice your first crop, and the second one is about the same. So it's sort of that sort of thing. I'm not answering you because I really don't know. So that's why I'm jumping up and down.
Thank you for that wonderful exposition. I think it's been an astonishing success, and I think the challenge to replicate that sort of success is going to be a very difficult one. But I just want to follow Dave's question about the yield gap. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but if I understand correctly, a lot of the progress in improving yields in many crop species has been to do with changing harvest index. So it's really about planting density, essentially, and receiving the improved yield per unit area. But if your intercrops are dependent upon a later maturity, do you think that has necessarily has a constraint on what you can achieve in terms of bridging that yield gap? In other words, is it a false hope that you could overcome the yield gap because of the strategy for including the species in intercrops?
You know what? One of the things in my photothermal adaptation and understanding is to look at where can this crop, this variety, express its yield potential. And therefore, you take a suite of varieties, target there, and make sure that they're there. But then when you start going on farm, on station in that area, you're working with the national programs, and you're asking them what crop would go with it. Do you have a variety that is later? In other words, you don't want it to off. You know, I had work which I did here, and if I had published it, you'd have seen it, that pigeon pea does not have a mechanism of adaptation to drought. What it does is that as soon as it fails the drought, keeps on going, putting the root deep and deeper. As soon as it reaches a point where it can't do it anymore, it starts dropping leaves, number one. Two, then flowers. And three, everything above ground except stems. Going back to what you're saying is that with that knowledge and knowing where to target, and you know the rainfall duration, I've worked with KPC to start eventually refining where it's going to go. At the national program, you start looking at what is the crop that goes with it, which in most of East Africa and Eastern and South Africa is maize. So you start looking at, can we have an earlier maturing maize? Is there a yield penalty? Are farmers prepared to do that? So you start working on those. Those are the things which you balance and so on. In the final analysis, it will be the farmer determining whether he's prepared to give up his maize or give up on his pigeon pea. So those are some of the things. And Again, I didn't have any science. It's just some sort of being a village boy. I tend to look at varieties that are not, and most of our varieties are not determinate, but they're not indeterminate. They're sort of semi. And the advantage of that is that in a good year, it tends to be more plastic and therefore continue growing. In a dry year, it tends to finish growth early. I did not go about it, but that's what I found and started selecting for that. Fadia.
In response to Dev's comment on genetic gain, in fact, in any crops, 1 to 1.5% genetic gain is really very good. In this case, it's more than 2%. And obviously, because base was low, even the most successful